Why do we embark on difficult journeys? Typically, it's because we see the reward at the end of the difficult path. But what happens when that's not always the case? What happens when we are called into something, God is asking us to do something, and we don't see the reward, or it's farther off than we would expect? In this episode, Mark and I are going to dive into what are biblical practices and principles for thinking about that reward and how we can rest in who God is. Take a listen. Let us know what you think. Hey, Mark.
Hey there, Chris.
How are you today?
Swell. How are you?
Swell. Like a wave swell?
No, like golly gee, I'm amazing.
Oh, golly gee, swell. Nice.
Throwback terms, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I like throwback terms. So for this episode, I want us to talk about this concept that's been on my mind for the last couple of years. It is how willing we are to put effort into something. So in our classes, we talk a lot about change, talk a lot about new skills, new habits, new ways of processing and even thinking about how we think. And sometimes we get like blank looks from people, or like, that sounds really hard. And change is hard.
Yeah.
And here's my thesis for what I'd like for us to discuss. We will never take action on something or put effort in something until we see the payoff, until we see what the potential payoff is.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I really want to have that conversation. What's the point of the conversation? What's the reward of this conversation? No, I'm just kidding.
The reason this came to mind is a couple years ago, I was working through a really difficult situation with some people that were close to me. And it required work on one party's part. And he told me, I just don't see that this is worth it. This is going to be a lot of work, and I don't see the value in doing this.
Like a futility.
Yeah,
in
felt
doing this.
helpless and futile. Yeah. And so it got me thinking about when we invite people into things, we need to get really clear on why this is beneficial, and not just the logical side of it, but also the emotional side of it too.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, have you seen that playing out in your life at all?
Yeah, I mean, the first place I would go to is our business context. That we say this repeatedly, because we're in the business of helping people improve their product development, and the stay the same, the stasis, whatever you want to call that. I don't know what the right term here is, but that has a great deal of power.
Yeah.
And to
it's like a giant magnet.
It is. Yeah. I'm just going to keep doing what we've been doing, or what everybody else is doing, those types of approaches. And culture will tend to stay the same because of that, unless you put effort into it, and you will not put effort into it, and people will not start to change unless, just like you described, unless there's a benefit that they can see, that they can connect with, that they care about, and then they're willing to try to change something. Or the way I put it in business classes is, if the cost of staying the same is more than the cost of changing, that's when you're going to see a change. But if the cost of changing seems like more than the cost of staying the same, then I'm going to stay the same. So just from that context, that's where we talk about, but it's just a general motivational principle of how we operate as human beings. We're going to tend to stay the same. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we're constantly looking for, like, what's that reward as a result of actions that we're taking? Like, what's the the cheese at the end of the maze? And I think that's a really good way of saying it. Like, if the cost of staying the same outweighs the cost of change. And so what brought this to mind as a podcast topic was, we were going through our Renewing Your Mind class.
Okay.
Where we're talking about the beliefs or the thought patterns that we hold on to. That's the stuff that causes us to react emotionally or do something as a result of something that happens. And we like to say that there's three things we bring into that. And the first one is our desire and our willingness to change, our willingness to explore that. And that really got me thinking about, like, because in the class, what we do is we'll find a belief, and then we'll find out what's underneath the surface for that belief. Like, what's kind of like the vow we've made to ourselves. And we've talked about this in the Renewing Your Mind podcast episode.
Yeah.
But we came to a really powerful realization as we were talking about this, that a lot of us have agreed with a core belief. And it's kind of like what we've based a lot of our stuff around. So in order for us to change that, there's going to be a big cost that's involved in that. And this is just one working out of this principle of cost and reward.
Yeah.
Because we're doing this analysis in our brain. So if I'm going to go through changing that, that's got to be a lot of work. And I think really the challenge comes down to this. Sometimes that reward is evident for us. That's where we go and enact change. Case in point, buying a new phone. Victoria's phone's been on the fritz, doesn't charge very well. We've had it for 4 years now.
I mean, it's an iPhone, so what would you...
I knew there was a way you were going to get a cheap Apple shot in there.
If I bring up my Android phone problems, you're going to have some free fodder for hitting there too.
But Victoria's looking at getting a new phone.
Yeah.
And phones are costly.
Yeah.
So we're looking at and evaluating, like, is the cost worth it? It's easy for us to see things like that and do that analysis.
Yep.
What's more difficult is when the change or the reward that's at the end of it, we're not sure of, or the reward is just being obedient to what God has called us to.
I'd add a third one, long term.
Yes. Well. Yeah. Great one to add.
Which to me is tied in my brain anyway, intrinsically with being obedient to God, because that is a trusting that he's got the long-term result. But they are two distinct concepts as well. If there's a super long runway for the ROI, if we put it in business terms, I don't know if that's really worth all this effort. That'd be a pretty common response for us.
Yeah. We've talked about this in hacks versus lasting change. Yeah. That was forever ago. That was like a year ago we recorded that one. But man, that was I really enjoyed that episode.
It sounds like in the context of renewing your mind that, and I have seen this as well for myself and others, that you can walk all the way up to a belief that you go, that is not a good belief. It is not a God belief. It is not serving me well. And I don't think I'm ready to change that.
Yeah.
Right. There's still an element of, even when confronted with truth, that I have to make a decision of whether I want to put the effort forth and pay the cost.
Right.
To actually change that.
Right. Yeah. So it hits on all three of those elements because it's unknown what the reward is going to be. The reward may not be super visible, and it's probably going to be longer term because it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
And this conversation stemmed out of some discouragement that we were having as a leadership team, talking about some of the classes and some of the people that have been coming to us, where we're seeing people get to the depths.
Yeah.
And we've realized, like, our success criteria is we want people to leave happy and joyful and full of the Spirit, but that's not happening for everybody. Some people are encountering the truth or the lies that they've agreed with over the course of their life, and they are not getting to a spot where they're saying, yes, I want to change that right now.
Right.
And for us, that's difficult because we want that change to happen because we see what the reward is on the other side. We've experienced that. That's why we're doing all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it became really apparent to me that people are struggling with this, to see that weighing of pros and cons, because we are so wired, for your third point there, we are so wired for instant gratification.
Yes. Yeah.
I buy a thing, it arrives tomorrow. I do this thing, I'm able to get the results right away.
Yeah.
Like, the best things in life are worth waiting for and worth putting effort and time and seeing the fruition come to play.
Right.
Like we talked about in the dating episodes. Like, it's not just, all right, I've decided I am ready to get married, I'm going to go get married tomorrow. It's a process that happens through intentionality, through checking expectations and inviting God into all of that. I think the same is true with really, really expensive changes to make.
Yeah, I'm reminded of how God likes to operate and what we see in Scripture about that, of just one of the major analogies that's used throughout Scripture of sowing and reaping. You can't rush that. There is not a microwave version of growing a plant. You sow, you create the environment, you plant the seed, right? You can't rush that.
Yeah.
The fruit takes time, and there are seasons for it and all this. So it's not a rush process. I'm reminded again of a quote we brought up before from one of our good friends, Dave Ping, that rarely does God do everything all at once or nothing at all.
Yeah.
Which is to say, it's process. So if that is who he is and how he operates, we have a challenge based on the motivational scheme, basically, that you've laid out, I think, really well, that we tend to, and increasingly tend to want things very instantly and want to know what the reward is. That's going to be a challenge. There's a bit of a cultural mismatch or challenge tension, maybe is the best word. There's a bit of a cultural tension between us, how we want to operate and how God has shown himself to operate. That is going to be a challenge for us in this.
Yeah. So what can we do about this? I think number one, to address the third piece, is acknowledging that sometimes the best things are worth putting effort in and not seeing the results for a long time. I'm curious about the first scenario and the second scenario. So when is the reward not evident, not super evident, or not clear? And then the second one, when is it just obedience and we're trusting in God that he has called us to do something specific? So for example, the case I'm talking about here is two people that were married and they wanted to get divorced. And there was no grounds for that. It was just they had drifted apart over time. And so God is asking us to be obedient, be together, because that is a picture of Christ in the church.
Right.
It was just they had grown apart. There was no abuse. There was no infidelity. There was none of that.
I know this is a little oversimplistic, and also I think is very biblical and spot on. It's actually for all three.
Okay.
And that is, it requires a higher degree of faith on our part. And I think the core of it is about who God is. Do I have faith in my Heavenly Father? Right? If I can hear from him, like if I can have communication with him, an interaction with him, so that I know his heart and I know, I'm getting directional things from him, then do I have faith that he's going to do those things, whether I see them or not? Because that's, if you go into Hebrews, into the hall of faith, that's right there in the middle of it. The amazing, heroes of our faith that we can list off, and that the author just got overwhelmed with how many people he could list off in this list of amazing people. They didn't get everything they hoped for. They saw it from a distance, is how he talks about it. And so that's a higher level of faith required to go, I don't know if I'm going to see this reward in full, certainly. In part, maybe. I don't see how the pieces fit together. I don't know if my effort's worth it. Am I obedient when I don't see those things? Like, that's the model that's laid before us scripturally, is to say, know your Heavenly Papa, know his heart, and invest because of who he is.
Yeah. Sounds like you're changing the calculation from being one of ROI, of being able to say the reward outweighs the cost, to changing it to the reward is just what it is in obedience.
Yeah.
And it's worth whatever the cost is.
Yeah, I think I would say that,
if it is something that God is calling us into.
Right, which is a critical aspect of this that I don't want to simplify, and yet is not what the episode is deeply about, probably a whole separate episode. But yeah, I would also say, even maybe this way, the reward is up to God in that sense. I will entrust him.
So we don't have to worry about the outputs. All we worry about is the input.
That is simplistic, and yes, right? I mean, yeah, that is the direction I'm heading. Directionally, I will agree with you on that. And yet God knows who we are and what we need. And so he is not going to leave us without outcomes that satisfy, that provide for our needs entirely. We're not going to get everything we want. He is also going to provide for our needs in the midst of this. And so he wants us to build the habits so that we're obedient to him. And he understands, because he made us, he understands how those reward systems work in our brains and in our bodies. Yeah. And so he's going to work with that. And yet it's not just the simple math calculation of, I'm going to do this so that I can get the reward either.
Yeah. I think the way that we can feel confident about that is resting in knowing who God is. So if you are not deeply aware of who God is, or not able to tie back stories of where God has shown up for you previously, that is worth resting in and spending time with him in the Word, praying, listening, being in community with other people that can see that and do that, because they will remind you, like, yes,
Yeah.
You may not see the reward right now, but it is worth it. It's worth continuing.
Right. Go hang out with people who've been doing this for years,
Yeah.
who have seen God be faithful when they didn't know that there was going to be any reward to it,
Yeah.
and they were still being obedient. And just go be around some of those people. And the stories are absolutely amazing and very challenging to our reward system.
Yeah. So see the effort, acknowledge it, know what the reward is and who God is, and then have wisdom to know if this is something that God is calling you into.
Yeah.
And do that by being with him and being with other people that love being with him.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for exploring that, buddy.
Absolutely. Great topic. Very challenging. If it sounds like we've got this, we don't.
Yeah.
We're struggling with it too. This is a challenge, definitely a daily challenge to do this, and a worthy one.
And we give daily encouragement to each other
Yes.
to
Yes.
to help call each other into this.
Yeah, a worthy struggle.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
Hey, folks. Thanks for tuning in today. Our team is made up of myself, Chris Conlin, and Mark Wavle, and our lead editor is Derek Donley. We're a crowd-funded nonprofit. Our free resources exist because of your generous support. To learn more about us or to check out classes that we talk about here, visit us at www.humanproject.us. Thanks for joining us on our mission to bring 1 million lives closer to the fullness of God's design.